Months passed and life at the academy found a new rhythm. Students practiced harder, inspired by Lena's story. Teachers worked with more heart. The atmosphere had changed. It felt warmer, more alive. Lena continued teaching her masterclass every week. Each session was different. Sometimes she focused on technique, sometimes on feeling. But most of all, she tried to show her students how to listen, not just to the notes, but to the silence between them. Her class became popular. Students from other towns started coming to watch her lessons. The academy grew in reputation, and visitors often whispered, "That's her, the pianist who brought life back into this place." Lena smiled when she heard such things, but she didn't let pride settle in her heart. She had lived enough life to know that fame fades, but kindness and sincerity last longer. One morning, while she was arranging sheet music on her piano, the director walked in with a letter in his hand. "This came for you," he said, smiling. She looked at it curiously. The envelope carried the seal of a prestigious international music organization. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a formal invitation. It read, "We have been deeply moved by your recent performances and your contribution to teaching. We invite you to perform and speak at our Global Music Festival this summer, representing the art of emotional piano interpretation." Lena's eyes filled with quiet disbelief. It was one of the most respected music events in the world, attended by artists from dozens of countries. She looked up at the director. "This must be a mistake," she said softly. He chuckled. "No mistake. They know exactly who you are now." That evening, Lena sat alone in her classroom thinking about the letter. She had once dreamed of stages like that, but that was a different life. Now she wasn't chasing recognition. Still, something in her heart whispered that she should go. Not for fame, but for what it could mean, for herself, her students, and for the silent dreamers who had once given up like she had. She accepted the invitation. In the weeks leading up to the festival, she practiced endlessly. But this time her goal wasn't perfection. It was connection. She wanted to share something that would speak to every person in the room, no matter who they were or where they came from. When the day arrived, the festival hall was grander than anything she had ever seen. The stage lights glowed warmly and the audience filled every seat. Musicians from all over the world gathered backstage. Violinists, cellists, vocalists, composers. Many of them knew her by name now. Some approached her just to say how her story had touched them. Before her performance, the organizers asked if she would like to share a few words about her journey. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. When it was her turn, she walked to the center of the stage. The hall fell silent. She stood there, a simple figure in a soft blue dress, her hands calm, her face serene. "Good evening," she began quietly. "I was once a pianist who lost everything, time, chances, and even hope. I thought my life with music was over, but I've learned something very important. You can't lose what truly belongs to your heart. It will wait for you no matter how long it takes." The audience listened closely. Every word came from a place of truth. "When I came back to music," she continued, "I realized that success isn't about applause or awards. It's about touching even one soul through what you create. Music has power when it comes from honesty, not perfection." She paused, her eyes soft. "So tonight I won't play to impress anyone. I'll play to thank music for finding me again." Then she walked to the piano and sat down. The room was still. She began to play a piece she had composed herself, a mixture of joy and sorrow, hope and peace. It started quietly, almost fragile, like a whisper. Then it grew stronger, carrying waves of emotion that rose and fell like the tide. The melody told her story without words, the years of silence, the pain of sacrifice, the rediscovery of passion, and the final peace she had found. The audience sat motionless. Some closed their eyes. Some wiped tears from their faces. The music seemed to touch something deep inside everyone present. When she reached the final note, it lingered in the air for several seconds before fading into silence. The hall remained completely still. Then came a sound, soft at first, then louder, until the entire room erupted into applause. People stood cheering, clapping, crying. Lena rose slowly, bowing her head. She didn't smile widely or wave dramatically. She just looked around, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. Later that night, as she walked outside under the starry sky, she felt an overwhelming calmness. The city lights shimmered in the distance and the cool air touched her face. She thought of her old days, of the long hours cleaning practice rooms, of listening to other people play while she hid her own gift, of the doubts that had once chained her, and now here she was, free, fulfilled, and at peace. Back home, she placed the invitation letter on her small table beside her piano. Then she sat down and played again just for herself. The tune was simple but full of warmth, like a conversation with an old friend. The next morning, she returned to the academy as usual. The students were waiting eagerly to hear about her trip. How was it? One of them asked, eyes shining. It was beautiful, she said softly. But do you know what the best part was? They shook their heads. Coming back here, she said, smiling. Because this is where my real music lives among all of you. The students clapped, laughing happily. They admired her not just as a pianist, but as someone who had shown them that greatness comes from humility. Over the next few months, more opportunities came her way. Interviews, invitations, even offers to record albums. But Lena chose carefully. She accepted only what felt genuine, what allowed her to share her true heart. One afternoon, she received a message from a small village school. Their piano teacher had retired, and they wanted her to visit and perform for the children. It wasn't a big event. There would be no cameras, no journalists, just kids who loved music. She accepted immediately. When she arrived, the little classroom was filled with excitement. The piano was old and slightly out of tune, but she didn't mind. She smiled at the children and said, "Shall we make some music together?" They giggled and nodded eagerly. She began to play a cheerful melody, inviting them to clap along. Soon the room filled with laughter and rhythm. The joy in their faces reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Afterward, one little girl came up to her and said shyly, "I want to play like you one day." Lena knelt down and smiled warmly. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "Never stop playing from your heart. That's the secret." The girl nodded with wide eyes as if she had just been given a treasure. When Lena left the school that day, she felt lighter than ever. It wasn't the big stages or the applause that mattered. It was moments like this where music became a bridge between souls. Years later, when people spoke of her, they didn't just call her a great pianist. They called her the woman who taught the world to feel again. Her story spread across generations. Students told it to new students, teachers shared it in classrooms, and her recordings were used to teach emotion in music schools. But for Lena, life stayed simple. She still walked to the academy every morning, carrying her small bag. She still sat at the same piano and let her fingers dance over the keys. Sometimes as she played in the quiet of the empty room, she could almost hear her younger self whispering, "See? You found your way back." And she would smile softly, whispering back, "Yes, I did." The years continued to pass, but her hands never lost their gentleness. The piano remained her closest companion, its keys holding memories of every joy, sorrow, and dream she had ever lived. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the room filled with golden light, Lena played one last song for the day. The melody drifted through the open window, carried by the wind across the courtyard where students were leaving after practice. They paused, listening silently. The music was tender, like a mother's voice telling a bedtime story. When the final note faded, the students smiled, whispering to each other, "That's her. She's still playing." And in that soft twilight, with the piano's gentle echo filling the air, Lena's legacy lived on, not as fame, not as glory, but as something much greater. She had reminded the world that true art doesn't come from ambition, it comes from love. And her love, carried through every note, would never fade. The days after the charity concert felt almost unreal for Lena. People were talking about her performance everywhere. Students, teachers, even people outside the academy had heard about it. Some said her music had touched their hearts in ways words couldn't. Others called her the hidden pianist who reminded everyone what true talent looked like. But Lena didn't chase attention. She came to the academy every morning just as before, carrying her small bag, greeting everyone with a gentle smile and heading straight to the piano room. She didn't want to lose the calmness she had found. The director, however, had other plans for her. A few days later, he called her into his office again. The air in the room smelled of fresh coffee, and sunlight streamed through the window, falling on a stack of letters on his desk. He looked at her and smiled. "You might want to see this." He slid a few envelopes toward her. "These came for you." "For me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said, "all from people who attended the concert. Some of them are teachers from other academies. A few are even from music organizations. They all want to meet you." Lena blinked, still trying to process it. It felt strange. After so many years of being invisible, suddenly everyone wanted her attention. "I don't know what to say," she murmured softly. "Just say yes to life." The director replied kindly. "You've earned this." She nodded slowly, her heart warm but nervous. Among the letters was one that stood out. It was written on fine paper, sealed neatly. When she opened it, her eyes widened. It was from a well-known pianist who had performed internationally. The letter said, "I watched your performance online. It reminded me why I fell in love with music. I would be honored if you would join me for a duet performance at our next charity event." Lena sat still, staring at the words. A duet with a world-renowned pianist? It was more than she had ever imagined. The director noticed her expression and chuckled softly. "Seems like someone finally recognized what we already knew," he said. That evening, when she got home, Lena sat by the window with a cup of tea, thinking quietly. Her small apartment was filled with simple things: a shelf with old sheet music, a few photographs, and her worn piano in the corner. She thought about how far she had come, from cleaning practice rooms to being invited to perform alongside a legend. But she also felt something else: fear. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if the world had moved past her kind of music? She walked over to her piano and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Then she took a deep breath and began to play. The melody that came out was uncertain at first, but soon it grew steadier, filled with quiet determination. Music had always been her way of speaking to herself, her way of remembering who she was. The next morning, she decided to accept the offer. The academy supported her completely. Students offered to help her prepare, and the teachers arranged her schedule so she could practice freely. Even the janitor, who had always admired her quietly, came by to cheer her on. "You'll make us all proud," he said with a wide smile. The duet performance was scheduled for the following month at a grand theater in the city. It was a big event that would gather musicians from across the region. For weeks, Lena practiced every day, not just to perfect the notes, but to connect deeply with the emotions behind them. One afternoon, as she was practicing alone, a group of students came in to listen. They sat quietly, not wanting to disturb her. After she finished, one of them spoke up. "Can we learn from you?" the student asked. "Not just the technique, but how you make it sound so alive." Lena smiled gently. "Music is like speaking," she said. "You don't just say words, you share feelings. If you only play notes, people will hear sound. But if you play feelings, they will hear your heart." The students listened carefully, her words settling deep inside them. As the performance day drew closer, Lena met her duet partner for the first time. He was older than she expected, with kind eyes and a gentle presence. When he saw her, he smiled warmly. "So you're the pianist who made everyone cry," he said playfully. She laughed softly. "I didn't mean to make anyone cry." "That's what makes it special," he replied. "Real music isn't planned. It happens naturally." They began rehearsing together, and it felt magical. Their styles blended beautifully. He was expressive and bold, while she was graceful and thoughtful. The two pianos seemed to talk to each other, weaving a conversation through melody. After one of their sessions, he turned to her and said, "You've been away from the spotlight for too long. The world needs musicians like you, ones who play with truth." Lena smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd come back to this world again," she admitted. "Then maybe this is life's way of saying it's time," he said kindly. When the night of the duet came, the theater was full. The audience buzzed with excitement. Many of them had heard about Lena's previous performance and were eager to see her again. Backstage, Lena felt her heartbeat quicken. She looked at her hands and whispered softly, "Please don't fail me now." Her duet partner noticed and smiled reassuringly. "Just close your eyes and play like you always do. Forget the people. Just listen to the music." When their names were announced, the two walked onto the stage. The lights dimmed and the audience fell silent. The first notes began, soft, gentle, like a conversation between old friends. Lena followed his lead, her fingers gliding over the keys with ease. As the music grew, their sound merged perfectly, like two voices sharing one soul. At one point, the melody shifted into a solo section, and Lena took over. The room seemed to fade away. Every note she played felt like it carried her entire life, her struggles, her years of silence, her rediscovery of music. When the final note echoed into the hall, there was a long, breathless silence. Then, as if waking from a dream, the audience stood up all at once, clapping and cheering. Lena bowed with a humble smile, her eyes glistening. She felt no pride, just deep gratitude. She looked at her partner, who nodded approvingly, a smile of quiet respect on his face. After the concert, reporters wanted to speak to her. Some asked about her sudden fame. Others wanted to know her story. But Lena only said one thing: "I'm not special. I just never stopped loving music, even when life took it away from me." Her words spread across social media, and soon people everywhere began talking about her again, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had reminded the world of sincerity in art. Back at the academy, things changed once more. The director asked her to lead a new program, a masterclass for young pianists who needed guidance not just in playing, but in understanding the soul of music. She agreed. Her first class was small, just 10 students, but their eyes were full of curiosity. She began by telling them her story, not in detail, but enough to let them know that failure, pain, and sacrifice were part of every journey. "When I was younger," she said, "I thought success meant playing perfectly, but now I know success means playing honestly. When your music comes from the truth inside you, people will always listen." The students nodded, inspired. Weeks turned into months, and Lena's life found a new rhythm. She was no longer just a pianist or a teacher. She became a guide, a light for those who had lost their way in music just as she once had. Sometimes she would stay late after class, playing softly to herself as the evening sun filled the room. She would think about her father, her lost years, and how everything had somehow led her back to the piano. Life, she realized, had a strange way of bringing you full circle. One day, as she locked up the piano room, the young teacher who had once doubted her stopped by. He smiled awkwardly and said, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you." Lena smiled kindly. "We all learn," she said. "That's what makes us human." He nodded, humbled. "Thank you for teaching all of us what music really means." She watched him walk away, feeling a quiet sense of peace. That night, she sat by her piano at home, the same old one she had played for years. Her fingers rested gently on the keys. She didn't need an audience now. She didn't need applause. She played because it was who she was. And as the notes filled her small apartment, soft and warm, it felt as if the music itself was smiling back at her, grateful to have found her again. After the showcase performance, everything at the academy felt different. People were still talking about it days later. The students couldn't stop replaying the moment in their minds, and even the teachers found themselves humbled by what they had witnessed. Some said they had never seen a performance so emotional, so alive. It wasn't just about technical skill. It was the way Lena's music seemed to carry something deeper, something words couldn't explain. Lena, however, didn't think much about praise. She still came to the academy quietly, as always. She smiled when people thanked her, but inside she felt both peace and confusion. The applause had reminded her of who she used to be, but it also reminded her of everything she had once lost, the dreams that had been buried under the weight of years. For the first time in a long while, she began asking herself questions she hadn't dared to before. Could she start again? Was it too late to return to the world of music, not as a helper or assistant, but as a real performer? One morning, when she arrived early as usual, she found the director waiting for her. He invited her into his office and poured her a cup of tea. His face looked kind but serious. "You changed this place," he said slowly. "You've reminded all of us what music really means." Lena smiled faintly. "I didn't do anything special." "Oh, you did," he said firmly. "You made everyone remember that music is not about showing off. It's about touching people's hearts. And you did that better than anyone." She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. The director leaned forward slightly. "There's something I want to ask you. The Regional Music Conservatory is hosting a charity concert next month. They've asked me to recommend a pianist from our academy. I'd like you to represent us." Her eyes widened. "Me?" she whispered. Yes, he said, smiling. You're the obvious choice. You have the skill and, more importantly, you have the soul for it. Lena's heart raced. The regional conservatory was not small. It was a respected stage filled with professional musicians and critics. The thought of performing there both thrilled and terrified her. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, she said softly. The director shook his head gently. You are. You just need to believe it. She sat quietly for a long moment, staring at her cup of tea. Then she finally nodded. All right, she said in a low voice. I'll do it. That night she could barely sleep. The thought of playing again in front of a real audience made her chest tighten. It had been years since she had been on a stage that big. The last time she performed professionally, she was a rising star, before everything fell apart. She still remembered that day vividly. She had been offered a place in a major orchestra. It had been her dream since childhood. But just as she was preparing to move to the city, her father had fallen seriously ill. Her family couldn't afford the treatment, and there was no one else to take care of him. So she stayed. She gave up her offer, started working small jobs, and watched her dream slowly disappear behind closed doors. Now, all these years later, life was giving her another chance. The next morning, she began preparing for the concert. She spent hours choosing the right piece, wanting something that would challenge her but also carry emotion. She settled on a composition known for its beauty and difficulty, a piece that required not just precision, but heart. Every evening after classes, she stayed behind to practice. Sometimes she played so long that her fingers ached. The janitor often peeked in, shaking his head with a smile. You never get tired, do you? He'd say. She would laugh softly. Music doesn't let me, she'd reply. One evening, as she was deep in practice, a few students gathered quietly near the door. They listened without speaking, their faces lit with admiration. When she finally noticed them, they clapped gently, embarrassed but happy. You're amazing, one of them said shyly. We've never heard anyone play like that. Lena smiled warmly. You will someday, she said, if you keep playing with your heart, not just your hands. Her words stuck with them. In the following days, the students practiced harder than ever. The energy of the entire academy changed. Even the teachers felt more inspired. A few weeks later, the day of the charity concert arrived. The event was being held at a large auditorium in the city. The walls were covered with elegant banners and the hall buzzed with excitement. Musicians tuned their instruments backstage, their faces tense with focus. Lena stood among them, calm but inwardly nervous. She wore a simple dark dress, her hair tied neatly, her fingers gently rubbing together as she waited for her turn. When her name was called, the audience went quiet. She walked to the piano, each step slow and steady. The bright lights felt warm against her skin. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. Slowly, the sound grew stronger. Every note flowed into the next, building waves of emotion. Her hands moved with grace and confidence. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano. People in the audience leaned forward. Some closed their eyes, lost in the music. Others simply watched her hands move as if trying to understand how such emotion could come from one person. When she finished, the final chord echoed for a moment before fading. Then came silence, long, complete silence, and then, like a sudden burst, applause filled the hall. People stood up, clapping loudly. Lena smiled faintly, bowing her head. Her heart was full, not from pride but from gratitude. It felt like a circle had finally closed. After the concert, the director found her backstage. His eyes were shining. You did it, he said. You made the whole hall fall silent. I haven't seen that happen in years, Lena laughed softly. I was terrified, she admitted. He smiled. That's what makes you human. And that's why your music reaches people. Later, as she left the hall, a woman from the audience approached her. She looked emotional. I wanted to thank you, she said. Your music reminded me of my mother. She used to play that same piece. I haven't heard it since she passed away. Lena's eyes softened. Thank you for telling me, she said gently. Music keeps people alive in our hearts, doesn't it? The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. That night, Lena walked through the quiet city streets under a silver moon. Her heart was calm. She thought of her old teacher's letter, the one that said music would always wait for her. It had been true. It really had waited. The next week, when she returned to the academy, everyone welcomed her like a hero. The students surrounded her asking about the concert. Some of them had even seen videos of it online, where people had shared clips with captions like, "The woman who made the piano cry." The director called her into his office again. "There's something else," he said with a proud smile. "After your performance, the conservatory offered to open a collaboration with us. They want you to lead special workshops for our advanced students." Lena was stunned. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said. "They were moved by your performance. They think you can inspire young pianists not just to play but to feel." And I agree. She felt her throat tighten. She had never imagined that her second chance would grow into something so big. That evening, as she watched her students practice, she felt a quiet joy that went beyond applause or recognition. She realized that music had not only returned to her life, it had also given her purpose again. When the young teacher passed by, he smiled and said, "You've become our legend, you know." She laughed softly. "No," she said. "I've just remembered who I am." And as the day ended, she sat once more at the piano in the empty hall. The room was dark except for the golden light from the window. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, playing a melody that was neither sad nor happy. It was peaceful, full of gratitude. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything once but had found her way back, not through fame or fortune, but through the simple truth of music. For the first time in years, Lena felt complete. Weeks passed quietly, and Lena had become a familiar face at the music academy. Everyone knew her now. The teachers, the students, even the janitor who often greeted her with a warm smile when she arrived early. She was no longer the shy stranger who had once been teased for offering to play. She had become part of the rhythm of the place, like one of the keys on the piano that couldn't be replaced. Each morning she came before the students arrived, sitting at the piano in the empty hall. The sunlight would filter through the windows, landing on the polished black surface as her fingers moved softly across the keys. She played not to impress anyone, but because her heart needed it. It had become her quiet way of speaking to the world again. One morning, while she was playing a slow, thoughtful tune, the academy director entered the hall. He stood by the door for a while, just listening. When she finished, he clapped softly. "You always start the day with music," he said. Lena smiled gently. "It helps me breathe," she replied. He nodded, understanding. "I was thinking," he said after a pause, "we have a student showcase next month. It's a small event, mostly parents and guests, but it would mean a lot if you played something that day." Her hands froze on the piano. "Me?" she asked in surprise. "Oh no, I don't think I could do that. It's been too long since I've performed." The director smiled kindly. "That's exactly why you should. You've brought so much life into this academy. The students adore you. It would inspire them to see you on that stage." Lena looked down at her hands. The idea of performing again stirred something deep inside her. Part excitement, part fear. The stage had once been her home, but it was also where her dreams had ended. She wasn't sure if she could face it again. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. Later that day, she helped a few students with their piano pieces. One of them, a boy with nervous hands and serious eyes, struggled with a difficult passage. He kept frowning and sighing every time he made a mistake. "Stop for a moment," Lena said softly. "You're too tense." "I keep missing the notes," the boy said in frustration. She smiled. "You're trying too hard to play perfectly. Music isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. When I was young, my teacher told me that if I could make just one person feel something when I played, then I'd done my job. Try again, but this time don't think about the keys. Think about what the song wants to say." He looked unsure but nodded. He took a deep breath and started again. His hands were still shaky, but this time the sound carried warmth. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. When he finished, Lena clapped softly. "See? That's the real music." The boy smiled for the first time that day. "Thank you," he said. Moments like that filled her days. Teaching had become her joy, though she never called herself a teacher. She simply shared what she loved. The students responded to her differently from how they did with the other instructors. They didn't feel judged around her. They felt understood, but still deep down, there was a part of her that remained quiet, a part that feared what would happen if she opened the door to her past completely. One afternoon, a few of the teachers were talking in the staff room about the upcoming event. "We should make it grander this year," one of them said. "Maybe include a challenging piano piece to inspire the students." Another laughed. "Who's going to play it? Most of our students can barely get through Mozart without freezing." The young teacher who had once teased Lena smiled. "What about her?" he said, nodding toward the practice hall. "She could play anything we give her." The others chuckled. "That's true, but do you think she'll agree?" "I'll ask," he said confidently. Later, as Lena was packing up her things, he approached her. "There's something we'd like you to do," he began. "The teachers want you to play one of the main pieces at the showcase." Lena blinked. "They do?" "Yes," he said. "They want you to perform one of the Academy's most advanced selections. It's the same one we give to our top-level students, but honestly, no one has managed to play it completely right yet." She let out a nervous laugh. "That sounds difficult. That's why we thought of you," he said with a grin. "You make the impossible look easy." Lena hesitated. The name of the piece he mentioned stirred a deep memory. It was one she had played years ago in one of her last competitions, before everything in her life had changed. Back then, it had been her signature piece, one that had brought audiences to their feet. But she hadn't touched it in over a decade. Still, she found herself saying, "All right, I'll try." For the next few days, she stayed late after classes, practicing alone in the hall. The first time she tried playing it, her hands trembled. The notes didn't come as easily as before. Her fingers missed keys and her rhythm faltered. She stopped halfway, sighing. "Maybe I'm too old for this," she whispered to herself. But she didn't give up. Each day she came back. Each night she practiced until her hands remembered their strength again. Slowly, the music began to return, not just in her fingers, but in her heart. One evening, as she practiced, the young teacher who had given her the piece quietly entered the hall. He watched her from a distance, amazed by how her body seemed to move with the rhythm. She didn't just play the piano, she became the music itself. When she finished, he clapped softly. "You make it look effortless," he said. Lena smiled. "It isn't effortless. Every note is a memory I had to wake up." He looked at her curiously. "You know, no one here really knows your story. You just appeared one day and now everyone looks up to you. What made you stop playing all those years ago?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Life got heavy," she said finally. "My family needed me. Music didn't pay the bills back then. So I stopped chasing stages and started chasing survival." He nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "I'm glad life brought you back to it," she smiled faintly. "So am I." Days passed and soon the showcase day was near. Posters went up around town. Parents and guests were invited. The students were excited, buzzing with energy, practicing everywhere in the building. Lena pretended to stay calm, but inside her heart raced every time she thought about performing again. At night she dreamed of stages and bright lights, of applause that used to shake her chest and of her younger self bowing with a proud smile. She would wake up with tears in her eyes, unsure if they came from happiness or sadness. Finally, the day arrived. The Academy Hall was filled with people, parents, teachers, students, and visitors. The sound of chatter filled the air, mixed with the rustle of programs and the smell of fresh flowers placed along the stage. Lena stood behind the curtain, her hands cold. The director approached her gently. "Are you ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I think so." "You'll be wonderful," he said with a reassuring smile. As the lights dimmed and the curtains began to open, Lena stepped onto the stage. The audience went quiet. She sat at the piano, her heart pounding, her fingers trembling slightly above the keys. For a second, doubt tried to creep in. But then she remembered the small boy who had once said, "I can't play it perfectly." She smiled softly and whispered to herself, "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." The first note rang through the hall like a voice breaking years of silence. The melody built, rising and falling like waves. Her body moved naturally, every note flowing into the next with emotion that reached deep into the hearts of everyone listening. The audience sat frozen. Even the other teachers, who had expected something beautiful, were left speechless. She played with such honesty that it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a confession, a story of pain and love, loss and rediscovery. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, the hall erupted into applause. People stood, clapping loudly, some with tears in their eyes. Lena looked down for a moment, overwhelmed. Then she stood and bowed, her heart full. That night as she walked home, she didn't feel ordinary anymore. She didn't feel forgotten. The world had finally heard her voice again, not through words, but through the music she had carried inside all along. And though she didn't yet realize it, that performance would change everything. The way the academy saw her, the way the students looked up to her, and most importantly, the way she saw herself. She was no longer just an ordinary woman. She was a musician reborn. The next morning, Lena woke up earlier than usual. The memory of the piano from the previous evening was still fresh in her mind. It played over and over again in her thoughts like a soft echo that refused to fade. She sat by the window with her tea, watching the street slowly come to life. Children ran to school with backpacks, shopkeepers raised their shutters, and the sound of the town waking up filled the air. But Lena's mind wasn't in the present. It was back in that music room, the polished piano, the shining lights, the surprise on the teachers' faces, and the feeling of the keys under her fingers. She hadn't felt that kind of peace and energy in years. All morning she couldn't shake that thought. Even while she worked at her desk, stamping papers and organizing files, the rhythm of a melody ran quietly through her head. It was as if her heart had started speaking a language she had almost forgotten. During her lunch break, she walked to the park near her office. It was a small green space with benches and a fountain, surrounded by tall trees. She sat there quietly, watching the water sparkle under the sunlight. A group of children played tag nearby, laughing loudly. Among them, one little girl hummed a tune and pretended to play a piano on her knees. Lena smiled without realizing it. That evening, when she passed the music academy again, the door was open. She hesitated for a moment, but her feet seemed to move on their own. She stepped inside quietly. The familiar smell of wood and sheet music wrapped around her like an old memory. The same young teacher who had teased her before noticed her at once. He smiled warmly this time. "You came back," he said. Lena nodded shyly. "I wasn't sure if I should." "Well, everyone's been talking about you," he said with a light laugh. "You gave quite the performance yesterday. Some of the students are still trying to figure out how you played that piece so perfectly." Another teacher joined in. "We were actually hoping you'd come again. There's a class starting soon and our accompanist called in sick. Would you mind helping for a little while?" Lena blinked in surprise. "Me?" "Yes, if you have time," he said kindly. "It's just a practice session. You don't even have to do much, just help us with a few passages." She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "All right, I can help." As the class began, students slowly filled the room. They looked at her curiously. Most had heard about the mysterious woman who had amazed the teachers the previous day. Some whispered quietly among themselves, wondering if she was really as good as everyone said. When Lena sat down at the piano, she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and comfort. The instrument was familiar, like a friend she hadn't spoken to in a long time. Her fingers trembled slightly at first, but as soon as the music began, everything else disappeared. The students sang softly as she played the accompaniment. The notes fit perfectly with their voices. The teachers exchanged quiet looks, impressed by how effortlessly she adjusted to every tempo and pitch. When one student missed a note, Lena gently slowed down, allowing them to catch up. She didn't scold or correct. She simply followed, guiding them like a quiet hand leading them through the music. After the class, one of the students approached her shyly. "Ma'am," she said, "I've been trying to play that Chopin piece for weeks, but I keep getting stuck. Could you show me how you do it?" Lena smiled softly. "Of course," she said. "Show me where you get stuck." The girl played a few measures, stumbling over a tricky part. Lena leaned closer, gently placed her fingers over the keys and said, "Try to relax your wrist. Let your hand breathe. Don't fight the music. Feel it." She demonstrated once slowly, her fingers gliding across the keys with natural grace. The student watched in awe, then tried again. This time, the passage sounded smoother. The teacher standing nearby whispered to another, "Look at her. She's teaching like she's done this her whole life." When the lesson ended, everyone thanked her. Lena packed her things quietly, but the head of the academy came forward before she could leave. He was an older man with silver hair and a calm, serious face. "I heard what happened yesterday," he said kindly, "and I saw you today. You have a gift, Miss Lena, a rare one." Lena lowered her eyes modestly. "I just love music." "That's all?" The director nodded slowly. Love is what makes true musicians, he said. Would you consider helping us more often? Perhaps as an assistant teacher. Just for the younger classes, Lena was taken aback. Me? Oh, I don't know if I could. You can, he said firmly but gently. You have something special. Not just skill, but understanding. You see, most people teach music by rules. You teach it by feeling. That's something our students need. She didn't answer right away. The idea scared her a little. Teaching? After so many years away from that world? She wasn't sure if she was ready. But at the same time, a quiet joy filled her chest. Maybe it was time to stop running from the thing she loved most. I'll think about it, she said softly. As she walked home that night, she felt lighter again. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. She noticed things she hadn't paid attention to before. The sound of the wind, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the rhythm of footsteps echoing on the street. It all felt musical in some way. When she reached her apartment, she took out a small, dust-covered box from her cupboard. Inside were old photographs, concert programs, and a worn-out pair of gloves she used to wear during winter rehearsals. At the very bottom of the box lay a letter with faded ink, a letter from her old piano teacher. She unfolded it carefully. The words were slightly blurred with age. You have the soul of a true musician. Never stop playing, no matter where life takes you. Music will always wait for you to come back. Lena read the letter several times, her eyes filling with quiet tears. She realized how long she had kept herself away from the very thing that once gave her life meaning. The next morning, she returned to the academy and found the director in his office. I'll help, she said simply. He smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. From that day on, Lena became a quiet but constant presence at the academy. She didn't have an official title at first. She simply helped wherever needed. She played for rehearsals, guided nervous students, and offered gentle advice that often worked better than long lectures. The teachers grew fond of her humility. She never tried to outshine anyone. Instead, she lifted others up. Students began looking for her between classes, asking her for help with their pieces. And whenever she played, even for a few minutes, the entire building seemed to pause and listen. Despite her growing comfort, Lena still kept her past to herself. She never spoke about where she had learned to play or why she had stopped. But sometimes, late in the evening, when the academy grew quiet and everyone had gone home, she would stay behind and play alone. The notes would fill the empty hallways with such deep emotion that even the janitor who cleaned the floors would stop and listen. One night, as she played a slow, haunting melody, the young teacher who had first teased her stood by the door silently. When she finished, he walked in and said softly, "That was beautiful. Why did you ever stop?" Lena paused for a long moment before answering. "Because life asked me to," she said simply. "But I think it's finally giving me permission to start again." The teacher nodded, understanding more than words could express. From that moment on, Lena's presence at the academy wasn't just helpful, it was inspiring. Students who once struggled began to improve under her gentle guidance. The teachers learned from her, too, realizing that teaching music wasn't about perfection but connection. She had started as a stranger who wandered into their hall by chance. But slowly, she was becoming the heart of the place, and though no one yet knew the full story of who she once was, a child, prodigy whose dreams had been stolen by life's harsh turns, everyone could feel that there was something extraordinary hidden within her quiet smile. The academy didn't just bring music back into her life. It brought her back to herself, and little did Lena know this was only the beginning. The world she had left behind, the one filled with applause, passion, and recognition, was waiting for her to return in a way she never expected. In a quiet town surrounded by gentle hills and sleepy streets, there lived a woman named Lena. She wasn't someone people noticed much. Every morning she walked to her job at a small office near the town square, carrying a worn brown bag and wearing the same gray coat she had owned for years. Her life was calm, predictable, and quiet, almost too quiet. The people around her knew very little about her. They saw her as polite, calm, and always ready to help others, but no one really knew her story. She rented a small apartment above a grocery store and spent most of her evenings alone, reading or listening to faint classical music on an old radio that often lost signal halfway through a song. To the world, she looked like an ordinary woman, maybe even a little boring, but there was something different about Lena, something she had buried long ago. It wasn't because she wanted to forget. It was because remembering hurt too much. Years ago, before life had pushed her into the corners of ordinary days, Lena had been someone else. She had been filled with music. Her hands had once danced across piano keys like water running down glass. The sound of her playing used to fill rooms, make people cry, and silence even the most restless crowds. But that part of her life had ended long before anyone in this town had ever met her. Still, every time she passed by the music academy on her way home, something inside her stirred. Through the tall windows, she could see students practicing on shiny grand pianos, guided by strict teachers who tapped their batons and corrected every wrong note. Sometimes she stopped for a second at the corner, pretending to check her phone, while her heart quietly listened to the fragments of melodies drifting from the windows. It reminded her of who she once was, and also of everything she had lost. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set and the streets grew calm, Lena was walking past the academy when she heard laughter coming from inside. The sound of piano keys followed, loud, playful, but unsteady. She paused for a moment and peeked through the slightly open door. Inside, a group of teachers stood around a grand piano where a student struggled through a complicated piece. The notes came out uneven and the teachers sighed in frustration. Lena didn't mean to stare, but the sound pulled her in like a thread from an old memory. She took a small step closer, then another, until she was standing near the entrance. One of the teachers noticed her and called out politely, "Can I help you?" Startled, Lena apologized and explained that she was just dropping off some documents from the office nearby. She handed over the envelope and was about to leave when one of the younger teachers joked, "Do you play? You've been watching so carefully." Lena smiled nervously and shook her head. "Not really," she said softly. But the truth slipped out before she could stop it. "I used to a long time ago." The teachers exchanged amused glances. "Used to?" one of them asked. "Well, we could use some help demonstrating this piece. Our students are struggling with it." His tone was half playful, half teasing. Lena froze. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her fingers felt clumsy even at the thought of it. But something inside her whispered that she should say yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was longing. Or maybe it was just the part of her that missed who she used to be. "I can try," she said quietly. The teachers laughed lightly, not in a cruel way, but in that way people laugh when they expect nothing to come from a moment. "This is a very difficult composition," one of them said as he handed her the sheet music. "Even our advanced students find it nearly impossible. But sure, have a go." Lena nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and calmness. She walked toward the grand piano, her steps slow and uncertain. The polished surface reflected her face, showing lines of time and quiet fatigue. But her eyes, those still carried a quiet spark. As she sat down, the room grew silent. The teachers whispered among themselves, amused that this ordinary-looking woman was about to attempt one of the hardest pieces in their repertoire. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment she just sat there, breathing in deeply. The smell of the wood, the faint echo in the room, it all felt familiar, like meeting an old friend she had lost long ago. Her first touch on the piano was hesitant, a soft press of a single note that lingered in the air, then another, then a chord. The room's laughter faded as the sound began to grow. Her hands, though older and stiffer than before, remembered what to do. The melody began to take shape, gentle at first, then fuller, deeper, alive. Her eyes softened as memories came rushing back. The small practice room where she used to play for hours, her teacher's encouraging smile, her mother listening proudly from the doorway. The teachers stopped talking. One of them slowly lowered his arms and stared in disbelief. Lena's fingers moved faster now, confident and fluid. Each note was filled with emotion, pain, joy, loss, and hope all mixed together. It wasn't just technical skill. It was storytelling through sound. The difficult passages that most players would stumble on flowed from her effortlessly, as if she had written them herself. Time seemed to stop. When the last note faded into silence, no one spoke. The air in the room felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Lena slowly lifted her hands off the keys and rested them on her lap. For a few seconds, she didn't even look up. She was afraid of what she might see. Laughter, confusion, disbelief. But when she finally glanced up, all she saw were stunned faces. One teacher finally found his voice. "That was incredible," he said quietly. Where did you learn to play like that? Lena hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked her that question. A long time ago, she said. I studied music when I was young. But life happened. I stopped. The teachers looked at one another, realizing they had made a mistake. They had asked an ordinary woman to prove herself, not knowing they were standing in front of someone extraordinary. For Lena, it wasn't pride that filled her heart. It was something gentler. Relief, perhaps. The kind that comes when you finally remember who you are after years of forgetting. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she felt lighter than she had in years. Her steps were slow, but her heart beat faster, almost in rhythm with the music still echoing in her mind. She smiled to herself, realizing how alive she had felt sitting at that piano. At home, she sat by her window with a cup of tea, the city quiet around her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. The music inside her had never really gone. It had only been waiting for her to return. In the following days, she went about her life as usual. She still went to work, still took the same path home, but something inside her had changed. She found herself humming softly while working. Her colleagues noticed the small smile that appeared on her face more often now. One afternoon, a student from the academy came to her office with a message. The teachers wanted to thank you, the student said shyly. They said your playing inspired everyone. They'd love for you to come by again. Lena's heart warmed. She didn't know if she should go. A part of her feared stepping back into that world. Music had once given her everything and taken just as much away. But deep down, she knew that moment at the piano had woken something that would not sleep again. That evening, she walked past the academy once more. Through the windows, she saw the same teachers working with their students. She smiled faintly and turned to continue home. But before she could take another step, one of the teachers spotted her and waved. Please come in, he said from the doorway. We've been hoping you'd stop by again. Lena hesitated, looking through the doorway at the grand piano gleaming under the lights. Then she looked at her own hands, still carrying the faint memory of those keys beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. That single decision, so small and quiet, would soon change everything for her, for the teachers, and for every student in that academy. But in that moment, Lena didn't think about the future. She only felt the faint hum of the piano calling to her again, like an old friend saying, "Welcome back."